All right, Owen, part two. So in your last talk, you had a couple things that were kind of limiting what things you could say. You had a documentary which came out like a month or two ago, and then there were other factors that kind of kept you from being able to say everything you wanted to say.
Yeah, Mark, I think we left off where I really couldn't speak on some of the subject matters due to the fact that Mark Wahlberg had an exclusive with me and Cocaine Quarterback on Amazon Prime.
And that's why I had to take down the video after I posted it.
Yeah.
A couple days after.
We got a call from Wahlberg a couple days later, right?
Yeah.
But that's a learning curve for someone that's never been in Hollywood, right?
Yeah, so this is all new for you.
This is a new part of life, and I'm learning as I go with the punches.
Yeah.
But I definitely had to leave out a lot because the main story on how did Owen Hanson get out of prison, and I tell people, man, it was a game of chess, right? You have some options in prison before you get sentenced to 21 years, and are you going to stay in prison the rest of your life, or are you going to cooperate against the cartel and maybe never make it out? And I had those options, obviously. I remember my lawyer saying, "Hey, we can get you out of prison tomorrow if you're willing to take down El Jefe." And I said to myself, I'm not signing any death certificates. I have a wife and father and a mother and sisters, and that's something I'm not interested in. And the minute I sit down and debrief on the cartel is probably the worst thing I could have done. And I'm blessed that we didn't have to go down that route.
Yeah, that would have been a hairy situation if you told them what they wanted to hear and got free, and then you're out in the world.
Yeah, so like I said, it's a game of chess, and I knew I had this ace in the hole, right, in my back pocket, and I told my lawyer, probably a year and a half into my sentence, after I've turned down the prosecution to cooperate against my cartel boss, and I knew we had a crooked attorney in Australia, and he was so corrupt that my attorney actually got me indicted, and a lot of people say, oh, this Robin Hood's the one that ratted on you. No doubt did Robin Hood rat on me, but there's so many more elements to my case that people don't really know about because they haven't seen the behind the scenes, and that's why I'm telling you today. So the first day I got arrested, I see my lawyer the next week, and the first thing he plays to me is this interview, and I'll never forget it. You got to rewind back in 2011. If you remember correctly, Robin Hood just lost $2.5 million of mine. In the same day, my personal trainer got picked off with $700,000 in a bag of a suitcase, right? And I was like, okay, I'm in the hole, $3.2 million to the cartel right now. What the fuck am I going to do? And Sean Carolyn, my personal trainer that got picked off with the $700,000, he's from Australia, and he says, mate, don't worry. He says, we got a lawyer that will get you this money back. He says, we'll pay a couple $1,000s to some barristers, and we'll work a deal with this lawyer. And I remember meeting this lawyer, Michael Croak, and he says, mate, this is not an issue. He says, we got this. And I'm like, okay, great. And I remember I went back to the U.S. because I was now a wanted man in Australia. And I was like, okay.
My dad was giving me a hard time about not watching the news enough, so naturally I gave him a hard time right back. I told him most of what we're shown is designed to alarm us, not inform us. And that's why I asked Ground News to sponsor my channel. Ground News is an app and website that helps you form your own opinions by showing you every article published on any story worldwide. My favorite part is how it breaks down each news source's political bias, reliability, and even ownership, so you can actually see where your information is coming from. Let me show you how it works. Here's a story about the Palisades fires in Los Angeles. Ground News shows that 13 outlets covered it, most leaning slightly right. You can instantly see who owns these outlets, how reliable they are, and how differently they frame the same event. Some headlines focus on firefighter decisions, others on weather and risk. Same story told through two very different lenses. I also like their blind spot feed. It highlights stories that are covered heavily by one side but ignored by the other. It's a simple way to step outside your own echo chamber. So if you're tired of being told what to think, check them out at ground.news/SWU. You'll get 40% off their Vantage plan, and by subscribing or even gifting it to someone, you're supporting independent thinking and this channel directly. Again, that's ground.news/SWU. Thank you for watching.
You know, I had this attorney that basically told me, hey, we will get this money back. Don't you worry. And I left Australia, this wanted man. You know, obviously the authorities just started to do their research and figure out who this Junior DeLuca was, which was my alias. And, you know, I got back to the U.S. and I get a hold of this attorney that's in Australia, and he says, mate, we got it all figured out. He says, we're going to tell them a story. And he says, when we tell them the story, we're going to have someone go in and speak on your behalf, that they loaned you the money, or actually that Owen Hanson loaned this ZZ Top concert promoter, Andrew McManus, $700,000 for the ZZ Top concert that was playing in Australia. And they had this story so fabricated, the concert promoter went in to speak to the authorities, and then they had my accountant write a tax return that I was investing in this concert. And we had it all the way to where I was giving the concert promoter was having me deliver it to ZZ Top's manager. And we had this alibi. And what's funny, Mark, is this whole time we were putting this story together, this false story that this lawyer's coming up with. Unbeknownst to us, the federal government in Australia has our phone lines tapped. So my lawyer's got his office tapped, his car, his house. I've got my phone tapped in the U.S. And a couple of my mates, the concert promoter and a Kingpin friend of mine, have their houses and phones tapped as well as their cars. In Australia, they got a little different law than in the U.S., so they can tap lawyers' offices. And I'll never forget it. We're just telling this make-believe story, and he's like, "Oh, okay, you're going to tell him that this is what happened, and that you gave money to, you know, ZZ Top's manager, and from there you were going to get paid back in Australia the money you gave, which was $700,000, and that's why they found the bag of $702,000." And so this concert promoter goes in and he speaks to the authorities in Australia, and he comes out and he calls me. He goes, "Mate, I should win an Oscar." He goes, "I got these guys right where we need them." And you keep in mind, Mark, these guys are listening to us the whole time. So then the lawyer calls me and he says, "Oh, and now it's your turn." I'm just like, "What do you mean it's my turn?" He says, "You now got to go speak to the authorities." I said, "Wait a minute, lawyer." I said, "In the U.S., nobody speaks to the authorities." I said, "Are you crazy?" I said, "Why would I go speak to the authorities? That's like telling on myself." He says, "Mate, it's not a U.S. matter." He says, "This happened in Australia. You have nothing to worry about." I'm like, okay, I'm going to take this guy's legal advice, right? This is my attorney. So he has me go to the Beverly Hills police station, and I present an ID. I said, "Hey, I'm Owen Hanson. I'm here to speak to the authorities." Back then it was Skype. Remember Skype? And the Beverly Hills police officer looks at my ID. He gets on this Skype call with Australia authorities, and the officer leaves the room. So I'm thinking, okay, it's not a U.S. matter, right? And I sit down there, and they're asking me, "So can you tell us about this money?" And I said, "Yeah, you know, I loaned the money to ZZ Top, and this was their down payment for their concert that they were having in Melbourne, Australia. And the understanding I had was I would give them this money through my silent investor firm that I started, and we would get paid back, you know, our $700,000 back in Australia plus interest." It was all bullshit, right? And I got out of this interview, and the lawyer's like, "Oh, you killed it. You did awesome. We're going to get the money back." Well, years and years later, I'm literally still trying to chase this money. Like, I'm still asking, like, "Hey, where's this fucking money, man? I got people I got to pay back, you know, investors," which is really the cartel. And he's like, "Mate, we're almost there. We're almost there." So when I get arrested in 2015, I remember my lawyer comes in and he plays this tape, and he says, "This is what got you indicted," and it was the interview. Okay. I said, "Wow, that was from my lawyer," and my lawyer told me that this wasn't a U.S. matter, and my American attorney says, "You're a fucking idiot. This is the dumbest interview I've ever seen." And I said, "Fucking, he got me, right? He got me." And I was sitting in prison, Mark, for fucking 2.5 years before I got sentenced, just spewing. I was so hot. And I remember maybe like 2 weeks before my sentencing, the Australian authority had flown over. And I remember 2.5 years I'm into this fighting my case, right? And it's about time we finally just take a deal and move on in life. I remember the first offer my lawyer said was 30 years. And then I got a new lawyer, and he said, you know what, it's not going to be 30 years. He says, maybe it's going to be 20 years. He goes, I don't see you getting 30 years. I'm like, okay, well, 20 years is still a long time. And he says, well, listen. He said, the only way you could technically get anything less is if you were willing, if it ever came down to it, and you would be willing to take the stand against your attorney. And I'm thinking to myself, like, when is this going to happen? Am I going to just sit here and wait years and years? And he's like, you just never know. But if you give us the green light that you are willing to, if it ever comes up later down the road, maybe I can get your sentence below 20. Well, guess what? I get sentenced to 21 years. Obviously, nothing happened. I didn't do anything, right? And I remember that day I got sentenced. My lawyer was asking for 10 years, which was the mandatory minimum for the distribution of the cocaine. And the judge sentenced me to 21 years and 3 months. And I was devastated, Mark. I went back to my cell, and I was like, fuck, man, I just want to end my life. I was so bummed. I was like, man, just go to the Sereno, buy some heroin, and just take a big shot to my arm. And I kept thinking, how could I do that, right? I remember looking back behind me in the courtroom, and there was 20 family members there, from my mother to my father to my wife to my kids, stepkids, and my sisters and my coaches. And I was like, you know what? I could never do that to them. They're my support. And so the next day, my lawyer comes to visit me. And I'm like, man, 21 years and 3 months? I said, what happened, man? He goes, man, I'm sorry. He says, but remember, you never know what can happen. I said, what's that supposed to mean? Remember, you had that crooked attorney. And the whole time, literally, Mark, I'm going to prison. I'm in the penitentiary. I'm just thinking about my lawyer saying, you never know what could happen. You never know what could happen. I'm like, what did that mean? Like, is he leaving something out? And you fast forward now 2020. I'm still at Lompoc, and I've dropped down from the United States Penitentiary now to the FCI, which is not a camp, but it's considered like a medium security. And I'm there, and I'm in my cell, and at 2 a.m, my cell door opens. And they said, Hanson, R&D. I'm like, R&D? That's where you like get packed out and you either go home, go to the halfway house, or get extradited, right? And these U.S. Marshals were there, and they said, you're going to Australia. I'm like, what? You're getting extradited. And part of my clause was I was going to go do 21 years in the U.S., and possibly the Australian authorities could pick me up and give me a life sentence. So in the back of my mind, I'm like, holy shit, I'm going to Australia for a life sentence now. Like, that's all I was thinking about. And I remember these U.S. Marshals literally took me to the airport, LAX, and there was 3 guys in suits, and they're all Aussies. And I said, hey guys, what's going on? And they wouldn't tell me anything. They're literally in these suits, and I'm like, man, these guys aren't telling me shit. I said, you guys got to let me call my attorney. I said, I need to know what's going on. And they said, Mr. Hanson, we can't talk about the matter. And I was bummed out, Mark. I was scared, man. I was like, okay, I'm getting extradited right now. I'm going to go do a life sentence in Australia. That's all I could think about. And I get on the plane. We're on a Qantas plane. They carry me. I'm literally in a golf T-shirt, blue jeans, so I look like a normal civilian. And no one sees me in handcuffs. But they walk me to the back of the plane, and then they take off my handcuffs. And they sit me down in the middle of this airline, and I got an officer on each side and one in the back. But they're in suits, so no one really knows I'm an inmate. And I remember the captain of the plane came back, and says, "Mr. Hanson, are you going to behave?" I said, "Of course I'm going to behave." He says, "Well, I don't allow anybody to be handcuffed on my plane, so I hope you behave." I said, "Captain, I'm going to behave. But Captain, I've been in prison the last 6 years." I said, "Is there any way that you can send me over some of those cheese plates that you guys have in first class?" And he looked at me and he couldn't believe I was asking this, right? And he's like, "You know what? I'm going to look after you." And I remember we take off, and literally like 3 hours into the flight, it's probably midnight, and here comes the captain, and he brings me a fucking cheese plate. I'm like, fuck yeah, right? And I was so happy. I said, "Captain, that was so nice of you." And then I said, "Is there any way I could have some wine with this cheese?" Right? And he looked at the officers that were, my chaperones, and they looked at me. They're like, "No way, you're out of your mind." Right? And I'm like, "Man, I tried." Right? I said, "Well, is there any way I could get a cappuccino?" And Mark, I haven't had a cappuccino in like 6 years. And they're like, we'll get you a cappuccino. So I had cheese and I had a cappuccino. And I'll tell you what, that was the best meal I've had since I was arrested, right? Airplane food, out of all shit. Airplane food tasted amazing compared to this prison food. And I tell people the story how, I haven't been around women. You got to think since 15, and we're in 2020 right now. And I could just smell like a girl 2 seats up from me with like Bed Bath & Beyond body spray. And I'm just like, man, it smells like the spearmint rhino, right? You're like, that girl smells so good. And every little scent you smell in it, and you're like, wow, like I've been missing the free world. And just little things, right? Like you're looking at a girl that's probably a 4, and you think she's a Victoria's Secret model. And it's just like the little things like that in life that you realize you miss so much. And, I'm eating all the food I can. I'm literally staying up for the whole flight, watching Netflix, watching like different movies I've heard about and read about in the Wall Street Journal, and I'm just catching up, right? And there's this 17-hour window of freedom. And then we land in Australia, and I get to the prison. I'm like, okay, I'm in prison again, right? And they put me in this prison. They call it segregated housing, and it's segregation. So in this prison I was at, it was the MRRC, which is in Sydney, and there's literally probably 50 cells, all single men cells, and I had from terrorist to rapist to Hell's Angels to rebels, to nomads, to Mongols. So all these rival biker gangs have to be single celled. And they had me listed as a cartel member. I'm not going to say the cartel, but people can do their homework. And they had me listed as this member of this cartel. I'm like, fuck, man, this is intense, right? This is really a life sentence. I'm done. And there they don't call the guards. They call them chiefs. So all these guys are like, hey chief, can I use the phone? I'm like, okay. That's kind of weird, right? I'm like, chief, like, I think of an Indian when I think of a chief, right? And they put us in these cages, and there's an outdoor cage where you can go outside. So I go outside, and I'm talking to all these Aussies, and I'm starving, man. I'm just dying to eat some food, and I've just been eating junk on the plane. And I get there, and I'm starting to talk to this nomad biker next to me, and his name was Mickey. And these guys are like, hey mate, where are you from? And I'm telling them I'm from California. And I said, mate, have you ate yet? I'm like, no, what are you guys eating? He's like, oh mate, you got to try the pork chops. I'm like, pork chops? What the fuck? I haven't had pork chops. This is sweet, man. What kind of prison's this, right? He says, mate, just call on the button inside your room, right? And I was like, a button? And I look in my room, and there's like a button that's meant I'm thinking it's to call the food, but it's meant for emergency, right? You use it if you're like man down. He's like, mate, just push the button, tell him you're waiting for the pork chops. I'm like, fuck it. I go and I push the button. I said, hey guys, hey chief, I'm waiting for the pork chops. And the fucking guards come to the gate, and they said, what the fuck are you doing pushing the emergency button for me? And I said, well, fuck, the fellas said that I had to call you guys for the pork chops. He goes, we don't fucking serve pork chops. These fucking Aussies were playing games with me, right? He says, don't ever push that button. That's for emergency only. And I was like, man, these fuckers got me, right? I was so bummed out. So finally, after like 2 hours ago, and these guards are finally, simmered down about me pushing the emergency button, I said, man, can I get my phone call? I got to call my attorney. And they said, yeah, no problem. So they put me in this cage, and I called my attorney. I said, Mark, I don't know what happened, man, but these guys won't let me call you. I said, what's going on, man? He goes, you don't remember what I said to you the day after you got sentenced to 21 years? I said, yeah, when you told me you never know? He says, yeah. He goes, you just won the lottery in life. I said, what do you mean? He says, you know that crooked attorney? I said, yeah. He says, well, when you took the 21 years, they figured your case was over and you're going to prison. And guess what? The Australian government knows that you're the only one that can talk about the matter and how he made you go speak on this fake story, right? And I said, yeah. I said, well, what am I going to do? He says, well, I've already got Australia to agree on not extraditing you for a life sentence after you do your time in the U.S. He says, all you need to do is tell the truth, that this story was made up and that you took your lawyer's legal advice and just tell him what happened. And I remember I said, that's it. I said, fuck, that's easy. I remember they came and they took me out and they put me in the suit, and I literally sit on trial, and they're just saying, is that your attorney? And I said, yeah, that's my attorney. And they said, did he tell you to come up with this fake story? I said, yeah, he was my attorney. He was giving me legal advice, and we made up this. This is all a lie. And I told the truth. I did everything I was supposed to do, right? And he was found guilty for corruption. And I remembered during this time, COVID hit. And now I'm stuck in Australia prison. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, guess what? I'm in my own cell. I got a shower. I got a George Foreman grill. I got a TV. I said, I kind of like it here. I said, the fellows are starting to get to know me. They're joking with me. We're having great food. I have my own coffee pot, stuff I've never had in a United States prison, right? And I remember telling my lawyer, I said, you know what, this place ain't that bad. I said, maybe we can finish out my time here. This cell was 30 feet by 11 feet, 330 feet. I'm living in the U.S. prison is 6 by 8, which is 48 square feet, right? So I got literally something 7 times the size of where I'm living in the U.S., and it's like a studio apartment. And every morning they got this trolley where they bring you bread, and they give you a loaf of bread, and they ask you what kind of jam you want. You want cereal? What kind of cereal do you want with your milk? Would you like a 2%, a whole milk, a skim milk? I'm like, man, I'm kind of liking it, right? And they give you a set amount for your commissary that the government pays for. You get like $40 a week to spend on food for free. And I'm telling my lawyer, you know what, this place is pretty sweet. Let's just keep me here as long as we can during COVID. And he says, I'll try to keep you there, but he goes, I can't promise anything. Well, 6 months goes by, and I get another knock on the door this time. But this time it's the marshals from Australia, right? It's Australian authorities. And he says, Hanson, there's a G6 waiting in Melbourne for you, a G6. He says, all the airports are closed, but the U.S. government just flew in a G6 to get you out of here because you got to go finish up your time in the U.S. I'm like, man, that's got to be a fortune. And so they get me and they put me on this plane from Sydney to Melbourne, and I land in Melbourne, and now the U.S. Marshals are there. And there's like 6 of them. And they come and they black box me, handcuff me, black box my feet, and they take me back to the U.S. And I go to Victorville Prison, and I literally sit there for the next year and a half during COVID. The courts are closed, the prisons are closed. I'm getting box lunches 3 days, 3 times a day. No coffee, 1 shower a week. I'm like, man, fuck, I need to get back to Australia, right? I had a suite over there. And literally, I'm not gonna lie, Mark, that was the hardest year and a half I've ever done in the history of my 43 years. That was the hardest time by far, It was unhumane, no doubt. to shower once a week, to eat bologna and cheese 3 times a day, to, being forced to take a COVID shot in order to leave the prison and get transferred. It was like, man, this is awful. So I finally get transferred. I literally get this COVID shot, and I get transferred from Victorville. I go to a prison in Colorado, FCI Inglewood. And I remember we were trying to get to this prison for many years because my father lives in Montana. And I was like, okay, what's closest to Pops? And FCI Inglewood had a weight pile that was donated by the Denver Broncos. And I was like, I got to get to this prison. And that's what happened. I got to prison, and now, this whole time I'm thinking, okay, I've just stopped the extradition in Australia. Now what's going to happen? And, I started getting my master's degree. I ended up earning an MBA in business administration. And then I started writing my book, The California Kid, which you and I talked about last time. And I started that ice cream brand I told you from a mop bucket, from a 6x8 mop bucket. And this whole time I'm running this protein ice cream business in there. I'm wondering what's going to happen. The courts are finally opening up. And I remember getting a call in 2023, I want to say it was December, and my lawyer says, hey, Judge Hayes wants to rule on your matter. And I said, what do you mean? He says, the prosecution's asking for a reduction. They got a letter from the prosecution and the judge in Australia asking for some kind of leniency in your sentence, that you had ineffective counsel in Australia and that you helped with their case. And I was like, okay, so what's that looking like? He says, the judge didn't really like you when we got sentenced to 21 years last time. So he goes, hopefully he sees that you're rehabilitating in there. And, I'm going to show him that you earned your master's degree. I'm going to show him that you've been teaching inmates for their GED, and that you're a model inmate in there. And he said, it's a long shot, but let's see what happens. And I remember, Mark, I was praying every night, just like, come on, baby, just please. I've been praying my whole bid, and I'm like literally praying double time now. Like in the morning I wake up, and at night I'm praying. I'm like, come on, man. Is there a Lord? It's going to happen now, right? And I remember I literally get a call from my counselor, and they said, Mr. Hanson, your lawyer's on the phone. And I to this day, I still get goosebumps and choked up thinking about it. And he says, you won the lottery in life, Mr. Hanson. I said, what's that mean? He goes, the judge ruled in your favor. He gave you an 8.5-year reduction. And your 21-year sentence dropped down to 12.5 years. He said, you've currently been incarcerated close to 9. He says, we're going to get you 2 years halfway house and 10 years probation. And I was like, fuck yeah. And I got out in March 2024. And I think you and I interviewed like a couple weeks later. And that's how I got out. People look at me and like, oh, is he a rat? Well, it's up to you. In my eyes, I'm a businessman, right? I didn't rat on the cartel. I didn't rat on anyone in organized crime. But guess what? I was playing chess while they were playing checkers. And here we are today, telling the story.
You had a bad attorney.
I had a bad attorney. And I feel like the attorneys, they're the law of the court, right? They're supposed to protect you. And if you're able to prove that they didn't do you right, then guess what? I think that's fair play. And I'm blessed to happen, and everything in life happens for a reason. And I think I have a better purpose in life to be free rather than be behind the fence.
Yeah. What did prison do to you? Mentally, spiritually, physically?
Good question. Prison definitely tries to break you, right? There's people that go in there and they break. They're on their bed for the rest of their bid. They're eating soups. They're not exercising. They're not bathing. They fall apart. And I think, a good percentage, I'd say close to 85% of people break and they give up on life. And for me, I knew it was time to rehabilitate, clean up my life. And it was a message the judge was sending me to prison for a reason, right? I deserved to go to prison, no doubt. I broke the law. And while in prison, and I looked at the situation, I said, listen, it could be a lot worse. I could be dead, right? I could still be working for the cartel, looking over my shoulder, stressed the fuck out. And guess what? I'm here, I'm alive, I'm breathing. I get to see my family in visits. I get to hug them. And every day I wake up and I thank the Lord and I say, you know what, I'm going to do better for myself and I'm going to rehabilitate and I'm going to do all I can in here. You know, get my master's degree, get a job, write my book, do the documentary with Mark Wahlberg, do anything that will better me when I get out of prison. And that's what I did.
You come from a great family, great part of LA. You're going to USC. Probably had a scholarship.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's like, why do you choose crime when you have all this stuff going for you?
You know, I don't really see that being why I chose crime. If you remember my story, obviously, I went to the University of Southern California. My father was a construction worker. My mother was a librarian. I didn't come from money. So, you know, it's not right what I did, but I did come to USC standing out like a sore thumb, you know. People had the American Express black cards, the Mercedes, the BMWs. I had none of that. I literally started selling performance-enhancing drugs, recreational drugs to get by so I can afford to hang out with these rich kids. And then it's no excuse, no doubt, Mark, but from there, when I got that 9-to-5 job working for that USC alumni, I put all that behind me. And then, you know, what happened? The recession hits, and guess what? I start to scramble. And when you scramble, as an athlete, we like to win. And I'm a competitive person, and obviously I'm going to do whatever I can to be able to keep up with my friends that are now playing in the NFL, or my fraternity brothers that are making, you know, $1 million a year working for their dad's company. And that's when I became involved in organized crime, and I became a bookie.
And you just had some great opportunities that made your case.
I had some good luck, right? I had some good networking. My Rolodex was unbelievable. People would pay millions of dollars for the contacts I had. And at USC, that's what you do. You go to USC for networking, right? And that's what University of Southern California is known for. And I went there and I used every contact I could. And I just put them in this mental Rolodex of mine. And I utilized it in every way, whether you're gambling on sports or you needed, you know, Laker tickets or you needed to stay up late for a test. I would utilize any kind of contacts I had, whether it was making money or utilizing them to move product into Australia.
How did everything you've gone through change your views on loyalty, betrayal, and the people that got hurt along the way?
You know, my sitting in prison, that was the most remorseful thing for me. It was like, I can't believe I got, you know, 20 of my best friends indicted, right? And that was the hardest part for me, knowing that my accountant got arrested. You know, one of my best friends that won 3 Super Bowls got indicted. And all these friends, my contractor, my business partners, you know, my private investigator, all these people that were doing business with me got taken down. And for me, that was the hardest part. And I remember writing letters to every one of them.
How much time did some of them get?
You know, Tank got maybe 5 years. You know, at the end of the day, we know we're not dealing with apples and oranges. We know we're dealing with illegal substances that put people away for sometimes years, sometimes life. So we knew what game we were getting into, but it's the innocent people in my eyes, like my accountant, my contractor, you know, some of my agents that are involved in just running around dropping off money, something that's not really that big of a deal, right? Obviously, now it's even a harder pill to swallow that people got indicted on illegal bookmaking when sports betting in 2018 became legal in the United States. So that's the toughest for me because all these people now have a felony on their record for something that's legal now.
What's your biggest regret after all this?
My biggest regret would be not being myself. Going down the path to try to fit in. Trying to fit in with these rich kids and be someone I'm not. And I regret, obviously, stepping into illegal activity, crossing the line, because once you cross that line of illegal activity and you get put in that rabbit hole, it's hard to get out.
So now you're you're out of prison. You have a newfound.
I'm still a hustler, Mark.
Yeah. Who were you then compared to who you are today?
The person I was then was this man, this guy that wanted to be this narco, this kingpin, this man with 40 women throughout the United States and the world, and this international playboy, right? And I cared about the materialistic things, the yachts, the private jets, the cars, the Rolexes, the Richard Milles, the stuff that at the end of the day, once you've had that and you've been put in prison, you realize, like, what is that all for? What do you get out of that? And seeing that and coming out and seeing how people act that have never been in my shoes and never gone to prison, it's a big eye-opener for me that people still care about those things. Don't get me wrong, I still like nice things, but at the end of the day, that's not what matters to me. What matters to me is my health, my freedom, my family, and it's a totally changed Owen, no doubt.
What do you say to young men who idolize your story and this criminal hustle that you had? I think your story really resonated with a lot of young men.
I tell you, I thought I was untouchable. I thought I couldn't be stopped. I thought this mind could outsmart the law, right? But you got to remember, the law has more time and money than any mafia family. They will take you down. They will watch you. I mean, let's do the math, gentlemen. I got literally put on the radar in 2011. I didn't get arrested to 2015, so almost 5 years the government was watching me. And they will watch you for as long as they want, because when they can attack and know they have you dead to right, they're gonna jump on you, and you're gonna go away for a long time. You cannot beat the system. El Mayo Zambada, El Chapo, these guys were ghosts. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they would never get taken down. Well, guess what? They're in ADX Florence, the worst prison in the world. They're in a box that they never will leave. They never get to see the daylight even.
Did you feel like your real life was just not enough when you were on top?
Yeah, you really do. When you're on top, you keep chasing. You keep wanting more, and that's the problem for an athlete. We come out of the Coliseum with 90,000 people. We hear people cheering. We win the game, and we become national champions, right? And you're always chasing. And for me, once I started getting involved in sports betting, I was chasing that rush. And it literally went from sports betting to working for the cartel to chasing a ton of cocaine throughout the United States into different countries and moving money for them like it was a job. And it was never enough. 1 million wanted 2 million, 2 million you wanted 10. Next thing you know, you're like, okay, what's enough to be done with this life? And you're never going to be content until you end up in a prison cell.
What was going through your head? What was it like when you realized for certain that this was over?
What was going through my head when I was arrested, you mean?
Yeah, like when you realized that this hustle it's evaporated.
People,
it's imploded.
People would think, okay, he's scared, right? And to be honest, Mark, I wrote it in the opening chapter of my book, and it was actually a relief that it was all over, because now it's like, okay, you needed this. This is the only way you're going to save your life.
Did you know that you were going to get caught eventually, you think?
Yeah, you either going to end up dead or you're going to get caught. And I knew I had to get caught, because if I kept going, I was going to either overdose on cocaine. It would be by the time I overdosed, it'd be laced with fentanyl, because I think like a year later, fentanyl started to come into play.
Were you doing coke?
Oh, daily. So it was no question.
And I'm sure that
I would have died off of that.
And I'm sure that played a big part in why you were so reckless.
You're very reckless, right? Drinking every day, snorting coke, drinking GHB, popping ecstasy. It was the worst habit. And I did it literally to just like numb myself, because I was so nervous that the authorities were after me, that the cartel had me working for them. And I just did it just to go numb. And I knew it had to end. I remember speaking to, my ex-wife, and She says, "You got to slow down. Like you're spiraling out of control." I remember she telling me that word for word. Your life is spiraling out of control. I'm like, man, I got to pay back the cartel and be done with this game. And I couldn't get out of this situation I was in.
Who stood by you and who disappeared when things went bad?
You got a handful of people that stand by you. Your mother and your father, obviously, your sisters, my fullback, Brandon Hancock, who would visit me, once a month. Every time I went to a different prison, he'd come and visit. And then all the people you thought your friends, the ones that you're whining and dining and flying on the private jets and buying, Rolexes and Hermes bags, they all disappear. The money dries up and they're gone. It's like they're a bunch of cockroaches. And it's sad, but that's the reality of this world.
Where do you see your life going now?
I see my life helping others. I've been speaking to everyone from the inner city Pop Warner football teams, Boyle Heights, Wolfpack. They believed in me and gave me a second chance. 2 weeks after my incarceration, I came and spoke to them. They were the guys that were in the Mark Wahlberg documentary. And I now am speaking to college universities, mostly at the sports level, the athletes. 2 weeks ago, I spoke at USC for the men's basketball team and let them know like the consequences and what can happen as a student athlete when you're involved in gambling. It's such an epidemic right now that college students are allowed to bet on professional sports. So I tell these athletes, listen, when you go on that application and you can bet on a professional sports, well, guess what's right underneath that? You can bet on college sports as well. That means you guys. And guess what's going to happen? You're going to have a wise guy, someone like me that's a bookie, come to you and offer you $100,000. And what's that $100,000 for? It's to give you $100,000 in your pocket with nobody knowing for you not to cover the spread. And this is where this corruption's happening. It's happening in the NBA. It's happening in the Major League Baseball. It's happening in the UFC now. And I tell these athletes, I say, do you realize that the guys in the NBA that are taking, $200,000 cash and fixing these games, do you really think they're doing it for the money? No, they're doing it for the rush. They're doing it because they know they have an edge, and they can guarantee themselves a win on this money. And that's, as an athlete, we like to win. And it's not about the $200,000. They're making $20 million contracts. It's about knowing they can win and win and win. And as an athlete, that's what we like to do. We're winners. We're adrenaline junkies.
And what do you want your life to stand for now? Just
second chance, right? Not too many believe in the underdog. You look at how many people go back to prison. I would say probably 90%. And I want to be that part of that 10% that not only doesn't go back, but learns from his mistakes, starts something from the ground up. Literally this ice cream brand, I started from a prison cell, and now I'm in over 150 stores nationwide. I have distribution throughout the United States, direct customer to door to door.
What's the name of your brand?
California Ice Protein. And it's a protein ice cream. It's like no one out there has it. I did some research when I got out, and being the entrepreneur I am, I'm looking, and there's a company like Halo Top, and I'm looking at the serving, and it's like 5 grams per serving. I'm like, what's the point? Like, what do you get out of 5 grams, right? I'm like, I can make a protein bar, ice cream bar with 20 grams. No added sugar. I use monk fruit. I use probiotics as the base, so it's a Greek yogurt base. And it's this revolution. It's the future. I mean, you go to Starbucks, and guess what? You get a coffee, and they ask if you want protein in your foam. It's like, it's the future of a healthy lifestyle. And I feel like if you can eat that protein ice cream that gives you that same feeling, that craving as an ice cream, then why not go with the protein ice cream?
And one last question, Owen. What would you say is the most important lesson you've learned after all this craziness?
The most important lesson. Trust nobody. Believe in yourself. Remember, you are your own worst enemy, and if you use other people to help you, you're going to go down the path I went down. I trusted people like this Robin Hood and this lawyer and these accountants, and it ended up costing me, you know, many years of my life, when if I would have just believed in myself and slow and steady, like I tell these kids, slow and steady wins the race. I try to cut corners because I like that fast cash. And when you go for that fast cash, it ends up putting you in this, you know, in prison. And just, I tell people, slow and steady wins the race. Be the turtle, not the hare.
All right, man. Good luck from here, and thank you for coming back.
Appreciate it.